Okay, reverse, what did they say, really want to scratch that, reverse?
I have in my notes, after all of these conversations, I have in my notes, tell me if I'm wrong, that in February 2013, that we increased all of these numbers by 2.
So that was a historical note that I made to the group, so that has some perspective, that there was a time when these policies, these numbers were different. But
Does Dr. Hines recommend that we go back to?
he does not.
Okay.
He says they should stay as is.
No, and I think that also marked when enrollment started to increase in Port Washington, it's possible, or a reflection of enrollment increasing, and we've kind of been level.
It's also when the world blew up.
Right, but also,
That was right after the tax cap.
okay, but on the other side, do we have classrooms sitting vacant? Do we have places, it's a kind of rhetorical question, do we have places where if we made class sizes smaller, we reverted to wherever it was, do we actually have classrooms sitting vacant? And I think the answer is no. So if we were to change the class sizes, where are you putting those students, I think is realistically what I'm saying that.
Right, but are we creating a policy that is about the ideal versus what we have available in building space? I don't think that,
Which is
but
why
you're saying Dr. Hines recommends these numbers, so
he
it's
does.
a moot point.
He does, but just to, I think, help answer your question as well, we do have regulations that does talk about a range and an optimal class size, which I do think is a helpful, shall we say, lighthouse to be focused on.
Okay, so we're going to massage that sentence that we were trying to beat to death, and we'll put it on for a first read. Okay, and Javier, I'll keep you in the loop and let you know how we got there.
Okay.
Okay.
So the next policy is a new policy for us. To give you a little bit of background, workplace violence prevention, the law recently changed. So we were informed by NISBO, we've been informed by Howard Gilman's law firm, that we need to make sure we're getting a policy on our books to make sure we're in compliance with the new law. So Mr. Miller has drafted a policy for us. I had sent him, after having communication with Ms. Brooks, that we looked at the NISBA policy. I shared that with Mr. Miller. He then responded back saying, I like our edits to that policy better, which is why you have the draft that you have. So this was written by one of Howard's colleagues, and he thinks this is the direction we should go in for adoption here in Fort Washington. We do have a little bit of a timeline that the state has put us under, so our hope would be that we can get this up for first reading as fast as possible.
Okay, so I have just three very small questions. Do we have something called an incident response team, or does it have a different name?
So we need to define, do we have it now?
Yes.
No.
Okay, so it's something that.
So in this policy, we need to define it.
Okay.
Which is what we've done.
Okay.
So I met with Brian Graham and one of our consultants through BOCES to review the necessary documentation. So this is a required component of the policy.
Okay, because I know we have other teams related to safety, and I thought, I don't remember that team, so.
Yeah.
Okay, just making sure.
And for this purpose, we wanted to keep it small, so it could be responsive very quickly.
Okay. On the third page, any person experiencing witnessing imminent danger, et cetera, should call 911 immediately. My only question there is, given that we have local police, and 911, from my experience recently actually, usually patches you in, takes your information and patches you into the Port Washington police, is calling 911 the fastest way to get help, as opposed to the Port Washington Police Department? I don't know, I'm just asking.
So our practice on that has been that everyone knows the number in 911.
Okay.
Not everyone will be quickly able to remember the Port Police.
Okay,
So, yes, it does take a couple of seconds longer, you're correct, yes.
okay, that's fine, just.
Yeah.
And then the only other thing is at the very end, I would ask Howard to please pull out the law, just the reference at the very bottom. You know, you should have the list of laws
Mhm.
that apply to it. That's the only thing, that's my only request really.
Sure.
Is since his people drafted this to, and other than that, who am I to mess with the law, so.
This, as you're probably aware, this policy that he wrote is more extensive than the NISBA policy. But what he likes about it is it lays out all the components of the law.
So in terms of that actual point, in NISBA, I felt included more information on when it's the process for employees to allege violations of the workplace, page 3 of NISBA.
Almost toward the bottom of the page.
Yeah, so there's like 5 paragraphs where it talks about being in violation of this law
Mhm.
and the process that should be followed. That he has not included. It does say this is not a required element of the policy. But, so did he just think that we don't need that piece?
So I think what you're referring to is when there's some sort of lack of follow-through by the district. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes. Process for employees to allege violations of the workplace violence prevention program.
Mhm. So I do recall that there was language in here about if you feel like the district is not handling your situation properly, that you do have means to file a complaint.
So do you think that that is okay to be out?
Do you want Dr. Shields to go back to Mr. Miller and ask if these 2 paragraphs are appropriate anywhere?
I'm just curious what his thought process was. You're saying that his is more comprehensive, I felt like that entire section was removed. So that was my only question.
Right. I can certainly ask him that, to confirm that there's nothing that's been omitted accidentally. So I think that's what you're raising.
That's, yeah.
And so that is at the bottom of page 3, and then all of the paragraphs, subsequent paragraphs?
All the way
Talks about
through, the retaliation being included, but those 5 paragraphs, are not a part of his. I just thought it was like 5 very detailed paragraphs that we don't have, so I was wondering what the thought process was.
Okay, so yes, I look at the bottom, where it starts the process of employees to allege violations.
Yes, and all the way
There
through
down.
workplace safety, not the last paragraph that we addressed.
I will confirm that, absolutely.
All the way through workplace safety. And then
I'm with you.
oh, the very, end, did you come out, yeah.
This we have,
Yeah.
up to there we go. So
So you
these
said
2.
I see,
And these two.
yes, uh-huh. Okay, got it.
Following? Yeah.
Mhm.
Yes?
And then we'll just grab the cross-reference and references from the district template. Ms. Gilliard, any comments?
I think it's a decent question, since your intention is to lay it all out,
Okay,
but I don't have anything besides that.
so we'll bring it back when we have an answer.
Absolutely. And if it's okay with the committee, if I can get that answer and then contact you
Yes,
with his response, and if
sure.
it's possible for a first reading as
Yes,
soon as possible.
that's great. That's great.
Oh, I'm sorry. Put
That's
it right
okay.
there.
No, it's
No,
okay.
it's-
I just want to make sure that I get it
No.
along as quickly as we can.
You're doing your work as a committee person,
Yes.
yeah.
Not a problem at all. So the next policy is one of the policies that's a required policy, so we're bringing it forth here. Animals in the school, what it really addresses is dissection and when a family is opposed to allowing their child to do dissection in a school. So what this does is outlines the process for if a parent, how parents are informed that there's dissection taking place, what the alternative activity would need to be, not necessarily dictating that, but saying that there needs to be an alternative activity or a project for the child, and that the child is still be expected to do that.
Okay, I have one thing I wanted to, that I noticed in the Port Jefferson version, it was not in the NISBA version. Where it talks, I always wondered what happens to the animals in the classroom, because I grew up in biology too. That was also a really long time ago, last century. The last sentence of the third paragraph on the Port Jefferson says, notice of the students' opt-out rights and responsibilities under the law and this policy will be communicated through the student handbook, and it says as follows. Excuse me. We don't have anything like that, as far as I can see, in the NISBA sample, where it talks of notice of the students' opt-out rights and responsibilities will be communicated through whatever, such as the student handbook. So I wanted to add that sentence someplace, so that there's an obligation on the district to make sure the students, this is saying the students have the right, but the students don't know that they have that right unless they're notified that they have that right? Like, we're talking about kids. Adults are supposed to know what the law is, but kids don't necessarily know it, so, excuse me, someplace where we can put that notice, unless I missed it.
It's here.
the
It's
NISBA
on the
one-
school year, teachers.
Yeah, but this one gives notice in a different way.
It just doesn't specify where.
Under the wellness policy, shall be shared with. Yeah, so it says, shall give notice to the students. I like something more definitive. Notice of the students' opt-out rights and responsibilities shall be communicated through the student handbook. And also, I want something, because a student may be told in the classroom, that doesn't necessarily get to the parent.
Well, it says such notice shall be shared with parents of those students and also be available upon
And
request.
so how is that happening?
That's also.
Yeah, we're just not
very-
specifying where.
It's a very strange provision to have like a paragraph of notice available on request. So I would actually replace that piece with what you're suggesting from Port Jefferson,
Okay.
right? It should be such notice shall be shared with parents of those students.
Families, yeah.
Right, like also be available upon request. It's weird, right? Like,
To the general community, so I don't know
so
who
they
would.
can come in and see the sheet, like, it's weird. I would take out the end of that sentence, and I think we could definitely request that you put in the student handbook, right? You could put that right there.
Okay, so how would you word it then?
I mean, I
To
think you would
synthesize it?
say, yeah, such notice shall be shared with parents of those students as well, and then,
Say such notice shall be shared with parents and students in the student handbook.
yeah,
Parents and guardians.
Or families, we'd start to say families.
yes, that's good, families. I would say such notice shall be shared with parents of those students and will be communicated through the student handbook as follows.
Included in the student handbook as follows. And then the sample text. You were enrolled in such and such a class. Those are that was my only observation, just to include codifying it in the handbook, I guess you would say.
Yeah.
Codifying it in the handbook. Any other comments, concerns? No?
The only thing I was wondering also be available upon request is I'm wondering if that is more about access for the community if they have questions on the moral ground or how does our district handle animals in classrooms, dissection. So I'm just wondering if it's out there as a recognition that these practices should be clear to perhaps a community member.
That they've access to the student handbook.
Student handbook.
Do they?
Yeah.
On the website?
And now it'll be in policy too.
Well, we can say.
I just think that's why it's out there, I'm not sure, so I just wanna make sure we talk about that, whether or not that's what they were trying to get at.
But we can keep the language that says, and also be available upon request, meaning if a community member wanted access to the notification, because that's what it's talking about, shall give notice of their opt-out rights and responsibilities.
This is actually a fairly old sample policy too, from the copyright on the bottom,
Yeah.
2010.
I
So
could
I'm
not find
wondering
an update.
If that's
Do we want it
not
as an
really
exhibit?
antiquated.
Do we want it as an exhibit to show the actual notice, so that it's available?
I don't know that we need to do it as an exhibit, right? It could just be like the way for Jefferson handled it, that would be in the policy itself.
What's in the policy itself?
The wording that goes in the
So
handbook.
as in the handbook as follows, right?
Oh. I think that's,
Well,
well,
accomplishes it.
NISBA has the sample also. It depends on which
Single text.
students who are in classes, need to opt out. So this opt-out language, or this notice language, is a little broader than the one in NISBA, which says you are enrolled in the title of the class, which includes animal dissection, the right to opt out. In order to do so, you must substantiate. So NISBA is just a little more specific, saying you have to put the name of the class as opposed to a very generic notice. Any feeling about that, Dr. Schultz?
No, I think if you take the bullet at the bottom of the NISBA policy as the language, I think it's very clear that, what steps need to be taken.
Okay.
And it's also inviting that parent into a conversation with the building principal. And I think to your point, that if there's questions, they should have the right to have a conversation about it.
Do we need to include the title of the class, or do we want to make it the generic version of Fort Jefferson's, you are enrolled in a class that includes animal dissection?
I'll say personally, as a parent, I like the title of the class. Only because there are some parents who don't know what classes we
So realistically, what do you think is happening on the ground right now, right? So I can say what I've
I
seen,
don't-
but it's a sample.
I don't think it's much of an issue.
Because I think what I've seen, which would have been a Weber, from Weber science teachers, was an email that said, hey, next week, we're gonna be doing X in class. If your child's uncomfortable doing it or you're uncomfortable with them doing it, like, please let me know and they can stay.
Which is interesting, because the policy says at the start of the school year.
Right.
So it's not as in if it happens, it's at the start of the school year.
So do we need to mandate that it be the start of the school year?
So,
The only thing I'm trying to do is get us the policy that's required, right?
Right.
I don't think I'm looking to change practice,
Right,
because I don't feel like we're responding to a
broken.
problem.
right,
We're just trying to be in compliance.
or at least it's not broken here.
Yeah.
Right,
Hey, I'm not hearing any complaints on this issue.
but the policy is saying at the start of the school year. So if we don't want it to be, and that just creates uniformity among classrooms, excuse me. So if it's going just when is as if, then that's staggered for different teachers, different classrooms. So I'm guessing that at the start of the school year is why this is
I think that's,
said here.
I think it's helpful for a teacher to say it up front.
Yeah, and an open house, and it's just like, and by, it's, So I'm not saying that they have to say it in open house, but
Mhm.
those are consistent timeframes.
Exactly.
That's what I'm getting at, consistency.
Consistency, yep.
Okay, so, we'll massage this a little bit with just the notice thing and, put on for first read.
And the language of the notice we're providing for the student handbook, not for the teacher, right?
I'm sorry, again?
The language of the notice is the language for the student handbook. We're not mandating how the teacher words it.
Well, why wouldn't the teachers just follow it? It's not, what's so, I don't
I'm
understand.
actually just asking a question about how we're thinking it is here, right?
Well, it says
Well, it
here,
says as
teachers of
follows.
courses shall give notice.
And if we're saying just notice shall be shared with the families of those students, and in the student handbook as follows, then as follows means we're giving them the template
For the student handbook.
for the, yeah.
And but the sentence before that says that the teacher will say it
Yes. Great.
and inform the audience. We're not telling them how they have to do that, but you're correct, we're giving them the language for the handbook,
That's the
Which
page,
could
that's
be
the
very
page
similar.
I'm on,
yes.
and then they can go ahead and key off that phrasing if they want to, but they can also word it down if they want
Yes.
to, as long as they're.
And actually, now that's raising something. Can we put in at at the start of the school year, teachers of courses that include a shall give, can we say written notice? In other words, there has to be an email, something. It can't just be that the teacher says it in class, because there are a lot of kids who don't hear what a teacher might say. Even like if we're having a test next week, some kids say, I didn't hear it, right? So, and legitimately, sometimes that happens. They're thinking about something else, whatever it is, if it's not written. So can we say give written notice?
I'm okay with that. I think it opens up an interesting discussion point, because I think there's a lot of other stuff that's arguably even more important that isn't given to students with written notice.
Yes, but we're working on this policy right now.
One improvement at a time.
Students do
Good
not hear
spin
things.
Okay, we'll massage it and put on for first read if there are no further comments. Great. Great, some employees over there. Okay.
So the next policy is also a required policy that we don't have. We do have this practice though in place already. So I'm bringing it to your attention that this sample policy was developed by the New York State Department of Labor and is recommended for our adoption.
Yes, this actually is not a required policy, but NISBA is treating it as required. It says some kind. I don't know if you just said that, sorry if you did. There was one place, and I don't know where it is now, that talked about, okay. In the last first, on the second page, last paragraph, first sentence. It says, while an employer cannot require that an employee works while expressing breast milk, nothing in the law prevents an employee from voluntarily choosing to do so. So my brain, the way it works, I don't know that this would ever happen, and I'm sure I'm going to an absurd measure on this, but my brain just thought about the teacher standing in the classroom while expressing milk, because the teacher wanted to work while simultaneously expressing milk. And I'm saying, I don't know if I've gone to I don't know who would want to do that, but, so how do I say this? Does anybody here think that is something we need to account for somehow while because a teacher is a very different person than somebody sitting at a desk in a cubicle, who may want to sit at a, and there are women who will sit at their desk in a cubicle and work while expressing milk, which is a very different situation than a teacher in a classroom with students. So I'm just saying, do we need to consider that? That was the only thing that jumped out at me. And I don't know if you're the person to
As a
ask.
principal for 15 years, this is not an issue that I run into.
We think we don't have to,
I have had a number of teachers that have returned from childcare, giving birth, who needed this accommodation, and we worked together to provide an appropriate setting for them, appropriate time for them, and it worked out very smoothly.
100% I understand that. But what this policy is, what this line is saying is that any teacher who wants to express milk, the way I'm reading it, absent any other law or anything that would prevent it, could actually stand up in a classroom and teach while also expressing milk. And so I don't know if I'm taking this to an absurd conclusion. I don't know if there are other laws that talk about time, place, and manner, but this sentence to me pertains to, because it's very broad in the law, pertains to a woman in her office, working, typing away or being on phone calls or
Right.
whatever, doing research, painting, whatever it is, but doesn't necessarily fit in the classroom. So that's why I'm saying, am I going to an absurd conclusion, or am I thinking about a
The way
possibility?
it's written is exactly where that goes.
My understanding of the law on breastfeeding.
Regardless
is
of the
that-
fact that there's a separate room, right? If a teacher wants to teach while expressing milk, I'm not saying there's anybody in the realm of possibility who might, but this sentence allows for it, that's all I'm saying.
I think that if that were to be something that happens, I think our problem with it wouldn't be the expression of the breast milk, it would be what the children could possibly see if that's happening in front of them. And so I kind of don't think we need to add anything. I'm not even sure that we legally can add anything. You see what I'm saying? I mean, I think there are some like very discreet ways to collect breast milk now. And I'm not sure that we actually even care unless the teacher is accidentally showing some body parts to students.
Okay, do we know if there is, any type of, anything that would prevent a teacher from expressing milk in the classroom, regardless of how discreet? Is there something we need to think about that prevents a teacher from expressing milk in a classroom while teaching students? That's my only, I guess that's my
I think
bottom line
that's a question I could pose to Mr. Miller.
I would,
And say, here's an maybe an outlier wondering, but let's see, is there anything here that we should be concerned with?
because I understand the discretion,
Mhm.
but things happen, and I just want to make sure there may come a parent at some time who says, my child saw X, Y, Z, and I'm trying to prevent it for the teacher's sake, for the student's sake. And I'm not talking about in a room provided for, specifically for this, I'm talking in the classroom setting.
Understood.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so we'll bring this back with an answer,
I will.
and if there's no concern, you'll let me know when it goes on for a first read, I guess.
It seems like a pretty remote, it seems to me if you're protecting the employee's right to express breast milk and providing room for them to do it, I would think it's a pretty outlier situation, the teacher would rather do it in the classroom.
I completely understand that, that's why I said I don't know if it's within the realm of the possibility, but the sentence exists, and the opportunity exists. And so I need to ask this question now and get a legal answer so that our policy protects, okay, the teacher, the students, and the district.
What sentence are you referring to, Jeff?
I'm sorry?
Can you repeat the sentence?
Yes,
you're referring to?
On the, where did I put it now?
Page 2,
Thank you, on page
bottom
2,
paragraph.
bottom paragraph, first sentence.
While employer, starting there?
Yes.
While an employer cannot require that an employee works while expressing breast milk, nothing in the labor law prevents an employee from voluntarily choosing to do so. In other words, from voluntarily choosing to simultaneously work and express milk.
Page 2.
That's where my imagination just went from.
It may also be that we could rework this sentence in a way that doesn't feel as much to you like the suggestions we made, because I have a feeling that this sentence is really supposed to be applicable to hourly employees. Right?
To hourly, did you say?
Yeah, to like, not salary employees, but what they're saying is like, the employer can't require that's paid time, but if the person decides to be working while they're doing it, you cannot pay them for that 20 minutes.
It could also, but I can imagine it could also be a corporate executive and who wants to sit in her office and work on a deal while, in other words, not having to go to the specific room designated, but wants to stay in her office and work. Well, that's how
I
it's
totally
written, so.
agree with you, but the sentence after it says, time working while expressing breast milk must be compensated. Right, I
Yes,
think the two pieces that it's trying to make us put in policy here are that the employer cannot require them to work, but if they do work, you have to pay them for that time.
and I understand that, but at least I know you and I as lawyers are trained to see the flaws in the way legislation is worded and the potential loopholes and unintended negative consequences. So I'm just,
I totally understand.
Thank you.
I will pose a question to Mr. Miller.
okay,
I think you've issue spotted something that would be like a very complex legal.
leave it to me, right?
As long as
It's
We will
what
get
I
his
do.
guidance.
It's what I do, I don't always see the forest. Okay.
1.7 on the agenda
Mhm.
is a policy that this committee had asked that we put on an agenda at some point this year.
Yes,
So we have done that.
yes.
And I believe it had to do with the age of the policies last draft.
The age, not only that it's old, but it just doesn't make any sense to me, because the very first sentence talks about we have to review the effectiveness of our internal operations, and to me, that really, I don't even know what that means, as opposed to doing a deep dive into our effectiveness, not just our operations, because our operations, that's our procedures, but also having the board do what the superintendent does and what is required of every single staff member who undergoes an evaluation. So that was my perspective in trying to make everything fair. So what I dug up was the NISBA sample policy. And I think that the more important part of this piece for me is the actual evaluation rubric as opposed, which is which would be the exhibit, as opposed to what's in the policy. So I actually had some ideas. I thought a lot of the sample policy was, I took the notes out and pretty much left the sample policy as it was and just made some, in my brain, some grammatical changes. But for my 2 cents, the most important thing is the actual evaluation, not the policy that says you have to, but what that animal will actually look like. So I guess that's something that we as a committee bring to the entire board, right? We can, I think the same way, just so the community knows, when we started to evaluate the superintendent, we had one rubric, and we used that, I think, for 1 or 2 years. And then we said, you know what, let's compare it with a different rubric. and see if we like that other rubric better. The first rubric was the NISBA rubric, and then the subsequent one was the NISCUS, the superintendent, the council, New York State Council for Superintendents had their own rubric. I think BOCES has a third rubric. And so it's, at least this board is familiar with having to choose a rubric to use for an evaluation. So I think I'm like straying, but I just had minor grammatical punctuation things to discuss about the policy that I can just, redline it and bring it forth. I don't know if I have to talk about semicolons and colons and grammar and stuff. Now I'm gonna stop and open up.
So are you recommending that we move away from the Port Washington draft and move towards the NISBA draft?
Completely.
Okay, just want to make sure
I was trying to.
the audience
Okay,
focus
sorry.
on what you were doing.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yes, I got so excited about finally getting to this policy. Because just on a personal note, this is something that I've wanted for years now. So I'm glad it's like here in 2024. So are there any comments from the committee on the policy itself?
Okay, so you would like us to start with the NISBA sample?
Yeah, so there are just a couple of things. So for example, putting aside all the grammatical stuff, in number 2, where it says improved performance, I personally would take out the words for a well-deserved pat on the back. I just thought that was self-aggrandizing. And I would say a program of self-evaluation provides the opportunity to acknowledge tasks well done. And by identifying weaknesses, provides the motive. So this is where I'm saying it's not really substance, it's just kind of the tone. But I thought the pat on the back was just, I can see it there. Good job, Ms. McCartney.
Yeah.
Good job, Mr. Smith. But anyway, so, yes, well, yes. So other than that, are there any comments about the NISBA policy sample? Aside from grammar,
Okay, yeah, I just haven't edit.
I'm sure you and I have the same edit, in which performance is, yeah.
Yes.
There were misplaced commas and,
Yeah, well, you're better at that than me.
was there any
My son
substance?
is, no.
Okay,
Now,
yes.
do we want an exhibit? Do we want to talk to the board as a whole about an exhibit?
Yes, I believe yes. And so the 2 exhibits are either, there's the NISBA sample, which can be tweaked, of course, and then there's the whole packet on the, and I'm not sure, I actually didn't think about whether the packet that's entitled School Board Evaluation, it's not an exhibit, but the color document. Trying to see if that follows, so there's, yeah, well, I mean, they're just different, so there's the exhibit that doesn't seem to completely mirror.
Is the exhibit from this one?
It is.
Huh.
It is. Let me
This
just
exhibit?
Yes, it's the NISBA sample.
You need to put it in the presentation.
Let me just see, because it just occurred to me.
I thought I shared this with you from, Scarsdale.
Oh, then maybe you're right. My bad. Okay. I apologize.
I could be wrong, I think that's what this
You're right, so
came
maybe that's why it doesn't look exactly like the NISBA sample. Okay, so, no, but in any event, I think it's important I think it would be helpful for us to at least have a recommendation, but to have the board, full board weigh in, there's no question in my mind, that actually has to be the way to go. And I wouldn't want 3 to govern 7.
No,
Of course not. And I also think that the NISBA one looks like it would be on super eval. It looks like something
Yeah.
that we could input electronically.
It
It'd be
was-
more comprehensive.
I
I
also
think
saw
we
it for
could
the
probably
first
input
time.
either.
I'm sorry?
I think we could probably input either. I think we have an option on super eval to like customize.
Customer, yeah.
I think I was introduced to this in my new board member training. I've read this before.
And it also, it's a rubric with which we're already familiar, even though sometimes we have issue with the rubric. So, or we could just bring both. I mean, I personally like the
So-
NISBA, but,
The other question I have is, we switched, as you mentioned, we switched our
yes,
superintendent evaluation. I wonder if that company has one as well.
if the New York State Council of Superintendents has one for school boards, we can certainly find out. I think maybe Dr. Hines could ask, because I think he's on that council.
So,
I can have him inquire.
so though we have in policy that we evaluate the superintendent, we do not have, laid out in policy what
What vehicle?
method we'll use. So I think my inclination would be to put more general language.
Yes.
And
Good
have what instrument we use be a practice that the board decides on each fall. And then we don't have to pass it as part of the policy, it doesn't have to be an exhibit. We can discuss it as a board and decide which one that is gonna be, because it also may be similar to the superintendent's evaluation, that we use one year and then we say, well, actually, now that we delved into it, some of these criteria were not so helpful and we feel like there are things missing, and so we pick a different one the next year. We don't have to pass a new policy to do that.
So each fall, the board shall decide what rubric / evaluation method or model to use, something like that. And yeah, I agree that each board should not be wedded to the exhibit. Anything else about this policy? Okay, so we'll wait to hear, well,
I
we
think
don't
we
really
put the
wait, we can
policy
put on
on.
for first read.
Right, because I think as part of the first read, we
Yeah.
can have a discussion and feeling what
Yes.
the board is gonna be on board
Yes.
for having the policy, right?
Majority, yes.
And then the discussion will be, what does the
What-
instrument look like, and
Yes.
you know, when do we start?
Yes. Yes. And I don't know that what instrument we use necessarily has to be a public discussion, I don't know if that's part of board development, but certainly we can,
Yeah, I think it's an internal procedure.
we can get the sense of the board. And if the majority of the board wants to have that as a public discussion, that's what we'll do. Before we go to community comments, there is a related policy to the board self-evaluation, which is accountability, and it's policy number 300. Just for next time, I found this at the back of my old packet as I was going through, I didn't even know it was there, I forgot. So just for next time, if we want to maybe consider whether this is also a policy we want to bring up to date or have, if we don't already have it.
Okay.
And I see you have it, so did you have it because it was
It was
part
in
of,
the,
it was in this, we
Yeah,
said it?
yeah.
Okay,
I actually was about to ask you about this.
yeah, so it was in there, so it's good, so can we talk about that now for a couple of minutes and then open up to community comments? Any comments on this policy at all? Other than changing the names of the cross references to match up with what we have, or any grammatical things. And I actually like language from the note as the opening paragraph. To begin with, effective school boards engage in continuous assessment of all conditions affecting education, blah, blah, blah. And I took out a couple of lines, but I thought that was a good preface to the policy.
Great. I mean, overall, I thought this policy was a good tone setter that we don't have now. So, I'm looking forward to having it.
And it also allows, I mean, we do this, where we request regular reports on student progress and needs. I mean, we do this, but I think it's good to put out publicly, it's a notice, it's a local notice. So we can recommend, what I can do is I can share just a couple of sentences that I used from the note as the preface. I didn't change anything. My thought was not, I mean, I keep saying I'm saying only as the chairperson, but sharing my thoughts with the committee and then with the board. There wasn't anything substantive that I would change.
The cross references, I think, are also
Right, they need to be changed.
valuable.
Oh, yes, they're valuable, yes. Yeah. For example, we don't have one on district goals. Maybe we will one day, but right now we don't, honestly. Any other comments about that?
No, I agree with you completely. I thought it was actually strange that they added the note as a note, because it did feel like some of that should just be policy.
Yes. So I'll share that, and then we'll get that on for first. Awesome, okay.
Keep checking a lot of boxes today.
The agenda made it easy, right? Just the luck of the draw. Okay, community comments? Anything? Is that Steve?
So I'll work backwards. I know we're gonna discuss the evaluation of school board operational procedures. I'm just curious if part of the discussion that we have, if the question can be asked, is this just a self-evaluation? Or I see in the exhibit that's provided, they're handing it out to administrators and asking. I think one of the concerns I would have is that a group of people establishing the assessment tool and then assessing themselves and then evaluating the assessment of themselves, what value does that provide? So I would hope that the board would consider expanding somehow. Now, I understand the politics and the difficulty of expanding, because now you are asking paid people that somewhat report to you to evaluate you, and is that evaluation even gonna be accurate? So I guess the point of philosophical conversation is if the board wants to evaluate themselves, which I do think we should do, and I agree with that, how can we achieve the most valuable evaluation?
Well, I
That's the
think
question.
having not done it as a board member at this point, I think going as a blank slate, I think engaging in the practice at all will give us a sense of whether and how it can be valuable. We haven't even done it,
So we did it my first year that I was ever on the board, so that's why I'm bringing it up, but I agree with you, we haven't done it yet, so yeah, and
This
maybe it's
board
different.
has not done it in 3 years. So I think we attempt it, I guess, at the end of this year and see where that lands. Like, as I said, I feel like we're a blank slate, and then we can tweak it and improve it and see if it was fruitful and go from there.
I understand you're basically saying it's the hen guarding the hen, the fox guarding the hen house.
This can be part of my, so I don't wanna take up all the community comment time.
That's okay.
We're gonna discuss this as a board. All I'm asking is that's the question
Yes.
that's asked first and foremost of ourselves as a board.
Yes,
And that can be part of the discussion.
yes, but the title is self-evaluation. And then down in number 5, it talks about it's how the board perceives its own performance. And so I understand what you're saying. Is there a mechanism to go how everybody else perceives the board's performance? And I think the answer to that is the election.
That's-
But I think there has to be something before that, right? It shouldn't be as drastic as the elections, it should be tweaking along the way. And so I don't know, maybe it's a question to ask this one. Right, like how, because is it panorama, is it thought exchange, is it, I hear what you're saying, like, we're in an echo chamber. I think we're not, I think we're the type of board where we wouldn't be in an echo chamber, I think we know where we fall down, but there are things, well, no, there's always something you don't know that you don't know. So, okay, yeah, I
That's just my
agree.
question for the
I get it.
discussion, my
I
question
get
for the discussion,
Yeah.
I guess. Animals in the school, I appreciate that Port Jefferson has put in parentheses dissection for science or whatever in the title, because animals in school immediately makes me think of service animals in school, or Hudson, or Sousa dog, and it's not clear. in
So
that regard.
dissection.
So potentially adding that,
Animal dissection?
I think it's animal, what did they say, animal, dissection in science classroom is what they put, or animal dissection, however you wanna phrase it.
Animal dissection, because I was in the science classroom, assumed it's in science, and that's where it always should be if it's going to happen at all.
Right, so again, yeah, so if that's just my only point that you're putting on for first reading.
Animal
you wanna consider
dissection.
it.
Yeah, okay.
Workplace violence and prevention, so Mrs. Melconian brought up the whole part about why that wasn't added.
Mhm.
I think the question is, look, this was clearly a summary of the law, so I'm assuming, and granted, I appreciate you asking Mr. Miller, if you're summarizing the law, you don't always need to put a summary of the law in there. I think the question for the committee is this language important enough that you want it accessible so someone doesn't have to go to the law to look it up? And if it is, then you should incorporate it as your recommendation to incorporate, whether the attorney says you should or you shouldn't. You know, I don't think that having this in here is going to cause us any legal issues. It's just how clear do you want to be, and is this redundant, or do you want people to have to go look at the law? So that would be my question for the committee in that regard. And then last but not least on class sizes, I'm not gonna let other people speak, but I see a redundancy in including, in listening to this conversation, right, and even, I know we discussed it as a board. I see a redundancy in putting in the policy, the numbers, but then having the numbers in the regulation, number one. I think that's what kind of screws us up right there and there. And we utilize regulation to give us things like numbers, not typically policy, which are supposed to be broad and sweeping. The other aspect is when drafting this policy and looking at it and talking about the timing and the justifications and everything, look, the reality of it is, if the Board of Education is really ever going to act on a class size policy, and we discussed today mostly the secondary level, because that is our most complex time, right? So on a monthly basis, the Board of Education receives an enrollment report. But our enrollment report at the secondary level does not tell us anything about enrollment in classes. It doesn't even give us a class list. In order to be fruitful and proactive so that no student is harmed or asked to have to cancel or close a class, maybe it should be that the Board of Education is receiving a list of enrollment in secondary level classes that fall under that 15 or over 30 limit prior to the discussions, prior to enrollment. Like, they know the schedule, right, in August, because kids are in those classes, so that at least we can be monitoring and seeing, and then follow up with the justification. Because if the Board of Education is going to act on changing something, and in this instance, it would probably be getting rid of a class, right, as opposed to, or breaking into more sections, but that's a budgetary decision. They would want to do it before the enrollment is solidified, or even before a kid has spent 3 class periods with a teacher. So it's almost like we need to get ahead of the game if we really think the Board of Education is doing something more than just stamping this checking it off and saying, okay, from a secondary level, right? So, and then in addition to that, realistically, if a class does fall under 15 or over 30 at the secondary level, it should be that the justifications that are provided to the Board of Education are enough that we understand these classes shall continue, right? They will continue, and this is the justification beyond because we think it's educationally sound. It's because we have children or students who are needing to continue their mathematical sequence and need to take multivariable calculus. We have students that are in a huge class size only this 1 year, and it doesn't make fiscal sense for a Board of Education to say that class can only be at 30 and now we have to add more teachers to your roster, right? So all of those justifications just need to be said out loud, and as long as they sound sound and fair, in addition to that, having that pre-look before school starts, I think that will help end some of the problems, which also, or some of the questions, and make it seem like the board is more engaged and involved in the discussion. And also then just takes your class size pupil teacher ratio policy down to like 3 sentences, right? Like, so that's my whole big thought process on it all.
So let's bring that back to the table. Putting these numbers into policy, my understanding of why that is the board is guiding the regulation, and without these numbers, I'm taking your first comment first.
Yeah.
Without these numbers, the regulation doesn't have a guideline. Like, do you understand? It's like the regulation we're making it so that the regulations are within these numbers. The regulations go further and provide the range. That these numbers provide the baseline, I guess you could say. So that was my understanding for why these numbers exist in the policy and then are expounded upon in the regulations. So as a board, I think we have to consider, do we want to set these numbers on the recommendation of the superintendent and then have the regulations expand it or explain a little bit further?
If you don't have these numbers in your policy, you're not creating boundaries.
Right, it's a
You're
free-for-all,
leaving
right?
it all
Yeah,
to
right,
the
it's free-for-all.
superintendent.
I want them in policy personally.
I think if we were gonna make a change to that, to me, it would be to condense the policy and regulation into one and put the range in the policy as well, which other districts do. I think we looked at samples last time that had everything in one policy. I don't think the answer would be to just take the class size entirely out of the regulation, or entirely out of the policy, sorry.
Yes, in sample B, there's the target class size and then there's the not to exceed.
And that's similar to our policy, or our regulation.
Our regulation, yes, yes.
So I think we talked last time about why these two were separate. I think it is reasonable to potentially just condense them, unless we think there's a reason to not have those pieces of it in policy and to have it as regulation. I can't imagine the administration making a change to the regulation piece of it without also having policy discussion around it too. So I don't know that they need to be separate, but I do think there should be numbers in the policy.
So that's the recommendation of the committee, whether we condense it into one. I mean, I personally like the regulations to be separate. Well, I mean, the ranges, those extra numbers to be separate in regulations, but if that's a discussion that comes to the board, we can ask.
I mean, obviously I'm not committed to it because I didn't raise it again, so.
Right. Okay, so I think the three of us, or at least as a committee, are unanimous on keeping, and with the recommendation of administration,
Yeah.
keeping these numbers here. All right, and the second issue was the timing of getting the class sizes. So at the secondary level, because we know there's a lot of flux with drop add, does it make, is it a good use of the I don't want to say is it a good use of the administration side? Is it beneficial? Can you see that it would be beneficial to the board to at least be alerted to potential problems at the secondary level? Because Ms. Epstein, you're asking for a list of, all the electives and all everything.
I'm just asking, no, what we get in the board packet in October. I'm asking if that, so somebody's able to pull that report from something. It's a push of a button, they have it set up. instead of just getting it in October, maybe the board should see it in June, July, August, September, so that they can watch and see, this is how these classes are, they move, they haven't moved, you see what's happening in the add drop period, and then you are better informed when you're making a decision about class size. Right, and then in addition to that, the justification list that says, these humanity classes that are listed as under 15, the rationale for this is, in this class year, we typically do this because you need a smaller class size to have a more fruitful discussion, or with this class, because of the size of it, or whatever, this grade level, we had to adjust or do something. I don't know what the justifications would be, but they could go through and at least give us a little more detail. In addition to that, we haven't even talked about second semester, when we have the same issue and we don't ever see a report on that. So it shouldn't just be in October, right? We need to have multiple. So I don't know how tricky it is. I will never want anyone to do more work than they have to.
Well,
But if this report generates itself already for the board, somebody has it as a template, you just change the date ranges on it, I would assume.
Right, so I'm wondering, I understand completely what you're saying. I'm wondering, if that how does it help us, I guess is the question. I understand what you're saying is that we end up kind of rubber stamping because the fait accompli, the kids have already been in the
Yes.
classes, we're not gonna suddenly decide to cancel a class, blah, blah. But I'm just wondering ahead of time, is the board going to be involved in saying, we see there are 6 kids in the class, we're not gonna run the class, but what we don't know is maybe by add drop, that class, for whatever reason, increases to 15 kids. Like this is, I don't wanna have any negative unintended consequences. So I understand,
So then
we don't wanna
maybe,
rubber stamp, but we also don't wanna prematurely cancel something that might have ended up not needing to be canceled.
so then maybe we have
Or vice
to
versa.
maybe then as a board, we need to lessen everything and just basically say for those classes that are under 15 or over 30, the report should be a justification report as opposed to giving us that list of the 700 not 700, but the 25 classes that are over and under. The justification is the more important aspect, because the reality
that's
of
the
it
sentence
is,
we were struggling with.
right?
But we do get justification, we get the
No.
number code number.
Those number codes just say it's over enrolled. If you look at what the key says, it doesn't say it's over enrolled because of scheduling conflicts, or it's under enrolled because of scheduling, or, whatever or class size is large this year.
Justification,
Yes.
which is understandable.
Yeah, I mean,
It's a reasonable
I think, and by more justification, I have like a laundry list here for like what you,
I'm not arguing with you, I'm trying to work
No,
through it.
No, but, and by justification, I'm not talking about a dissertation. I'm talking about, it could just depend on the subject. It could just depend on scheduling. It could just depend on each grade level and enrollment at each grade level. The experience of the teacher, the needs of the students, classroom space, availability of aids or any other budgetary constraints. It could be as simple as that, but just again, having an understanding, simply,
Of course.
that's why this happens. And I think it's clearer for everyone, right? And it's easier for us to have a conversation even when we have teacher leadership speak with us and say, we need bigger or smaller classrooms, and at least we have an educated vantage point to speak from.
Yeah, that I understand.
I think it's important to step back and think about what the role of the board is in this conversation. Because the reason I was comfortable in October is because I'm not thinking that this process ever is going to look like the administration coming to us with a list and us saying, nope, sorry, that class gets canceled,
That's what it
this
is.
class gets canceled, we're not running that, we're not
So
approving
what's
it,
the
you
point?
haven't justified it. To me, that's micromanaging. That's micromanaging our administration. And so I think the reason for the board to have notice and reason given for what the recommendation is, right? To have a recommendation be made is to make sure that the administration is critically thinking about the classes we're offering and whether it makes sense to run them at the level that we're running, right? That's the reason to ask for a recommendation or justification. And I would think that the conversation would be more, okay, is this a trend that we don't have students interested in this class? Is this a class we're not gonna run next year? Because I would think even in August, right, if you give us the class schedules in August, that's really already too late to mess with all the schedules of all the students. We don't wanna be canceling classes after students have chosen their schedules. I see it as a forward planning procedure, not a micromanaging procedure. I don't think we should be deciding on the fly in a couple months even before school starts what classes are being offered.
This also, on a very practical level, if you start canceling classes, you now have an FTE that's supposed to teach 5 periods that now is teaching 4, and what do you do with that? You don't cancel classes where now you're not actually utilizing the staff you're paying. So it gets it's a complex puzzle.
It is.
So what's
So
the point?
I
Maybe
think
we don't
that-
need to approve this.
I don't know, I think that,
Maybe
there's a
we don't,
reason
like,
to have it, but I don't think our board currently would engage in that kind of micromanagement, but I wouldn't be comfortable passing a policy that would allow or encourage a future board to engage in that kind of micromanagement. And so maybe it's as simple as adding a sentence about the board, the administration, and the superintendent, will engage in some sort of conversation about trends in class enrollment when they're analyzing for the following year or something like that. I mean, I'm completely fine with Julie's emphasis on the justification. I like the word recommendation, but
That's fine.
it really is, like, what we're saying is, we want an explanation.
Yes.
You can step outside these numbers, we just want to know why you're doing it, and that there is a reason and a rationale that is good for students and good for the education we're offering. That's really what we want.
Yeah, and I understand the catch-22. It is, because I think maybe what you're saying is we want to know if there's a trend, the way Dr. Shields can monitor the elementary schools over the summer to say we're starting to see a trend in, was it Guggenheim recently, or we needed to add the section, but that's also because we needed to add a teacher and shuffle kids a little bit. That, would it be helpful if we ask for trend, but then again, we don't want to cancel it,
But a trend report,
we're
right?
adding a section in the elementary school is not the same as canceling a class.
100%. So how about this? Maybe if this is like this big, what's the role of the board? I agree with you 100%. What is our job here? So what are we trying to accomplish? Because at a secondary level, we're not canceling classes, right? But if you want to look at trends, then maybe at budget time, this is when the board is examining those trends, right? It's not about, are these classes approved to run or not run for this year, but next year and following years on an annual basis, do we need to look at trends? I don't know that I necessarily am suggesting that either.
That's the principal's job.
They do that, so then again, what's the point and purpose?
I think it's
I think
about
to justify the
accountability.
expenditure. I think it's to justify the expenditure. because
It's about accountability.
Accountability,
And-
oversight.
But then, but
Yeah.
then we need to have a little, then it needs to be structured differently for accountability, because right now, at least from my vantage point, I don't know that the information that's received creates any sense of accountability. It just tells me there's 10 kids in this class, and they need to be in that class.
Wait, it's 12:10, what do you want to do?
So I'm sorry I hogged, because I know Polly's like jumping out of her skin.
everything that I wanted to say.
Do you want to add more?
No,
I just do want to assure you that having this policy is helpful to the administration,
Fantastic, yes.
right? So if we didn't have these caps, there would be a lot of wonderings, like, well, where could we go to? Or, and
But
I
even
think
if it's in
having
the
a cap like-
regulation, don't we have to follow the cap that's in the regulation?
yes, well, whether it's a regulation or
Okay,
policy,
okay,
from an
yeah.
administrator's standpoint, having this is helpful.
I don't disagree
I'm not
with
saying
that.
it's perfectly helpful for the board, but I just wanted to assure you that having this, whether it's in the regulation or in the policy, these numbers to work towards in building budgets, which we're doing now for next year already, and also monitoring enrollment throughout the summer, whether it's drop ads or new enrollees. That does drive decisions that are made 12 months of the year.
I agree. I think it's nice to have the policy, and I think having the numbers, whether they're in or out,
Right.
are there because they provide the guide, right?
Yep.
Guardrails. It's just a whole other aspect of it and how we use this policy. Like, are we using it to accomplish the work of the board, right?
Right.
And maybe we need to examine what the work of the board is in this particular instance.
Right, so I heard you saying before, is it's really not about picking and choosing which courses to drop an ad. That's an administrator's job to do.
Yes.
But what your job to do involves oversight of the budget process. And if you're saying, we're going to approve the following addition in teachers, it needs to be connected to enrollment in those courses where we're saying those teachers belong. So I do agree with you in that the budget process is where your use of this data is helpful.
I think in the sentence that we said we're gonna sort of talk about behind the scenes, we could think about adding something in there about the data being used for forward planning or something like
You're hired.
that.
You want to give me that language, or
Sure.
when I share this with you?
And then,
You got it, yeah?
okay, so again, this goes back to my comment a minute ago about having a separate policy for the secondary, which I'm very happy to see that's been said, but it is, the wording in the policy and the regulations shouldn't handcuff the administration to make the appropriate decisions that they need to make to adjust schedules for kids, and it is a very complex schedule for classes that have to be oversized because you have many kids that are in accelerated or singleton classes that they all unfortunately have to be in period 1 honors chemistry because they have research and they have symphonic orchestra, and all of those classes are singleton classes. So is there a way to massage the policy to look at it in terms of averages of that particular subject rather than just a singleton class size?
So when we
It's
get the
interesting,
report, yeah,
right,
it's in the report, when we
I know,
get
but
it.
then it's just like each justification is not a justification on the average, it's justification for that particular size.
Right.
So like, does it need to be so granular where you're looking at it from a perspective of, oh, period, this particular section has 35 kids, well, why is this section? Can it just be this particular subject, average class size is this? That's fine.
Is that helpful from an administrator?
So you saw this year that they included the average class size of the
Right,
course
this
is
is- yes,
X.
yes.
But this section is an outlier at
Right.
X plus 5.
Right,
Right. So I thought that was an interesting insight
yes,
for the board to have, that there's something unique about this section that we can't drop down.
Right.
And it might be that, the scenario you gave, right? So I think it's giving the board insight into the bigger picture of the course is helpful. And that's something that I could have Dr. Feeney continue to do.
Yeah, so sort of question, clarification, and a couple of follow-ups also on this class size policy. So while there is a policy requiring that the administration provide the board with this information about classes that are under 15 and over 30, 35, there is no policy that requires the administration to present to the board a list of the classes that are being discontinued because of class size, because of waning class size over the years, correct? Like the administration can do what it needs to do with the course book at our secondary schools. Okay. So, with that in mind, it strikes me that the value of this policy, in addition to stating, the maximums and, whatever that is, that also, elementary and secondary parents, community members would be interested in, is the transparency of the trend over time. So when a class potentially does get discontinued, and you start hearing about it, the board starts hearing about it, the board has the historical memory over time, and the documentation is there over time. It's not just a presentation, in a reactive presentation or something to say, you know, oh, we had to cancel this because over the last 4 years, we've seen the class sizes declining tremendously. The community will be aware of that because it's discussed by the board every October. So I think there's some value to transparency, and that to me answers an accountability question as well. But I do wonder, in terms of the tortured sentence that's still there and being massaged, when I read that, I was also struck by the idea that something that should be implicit in a policy and that it should sort of prescribe intent. But what it really is simply an example of two justifications for maintaining these courses. So a very simple solution, food for thought, might be just to say, such examples of, justification for maintaining class sizes at whatever levels would be for students to complete a series of 12. I think that would be a very simple and elegant way of solving the problem.
Okay.
To Ms. Epstein's point about including the numbers, I actually, Dr. Shields, when you said not including the maximums in the policy itself would create a free-for-all, I'm wondering why, in your view, why that would be the case, especially if the policy was amended to refer to the regulation and maintain the board's discretion as stated here. Like if it very explicitly referred to the regulation, would it still create a free-for-all if it didn't include that? And is the value of including it here really for the community to have an easy place to access it so they're not clicking around into different materials to find an answer to their question about their kid's second grade class?
Yeah, I guess I think it's a very interesting question. What I would say to that is what's helpful with policy is a large audience looking at it. It's a philosophical statement by a school board. To remove it from policy, the whim of a future superintendent or a future administrator might go completely awry from where the board felt about policy. So I just think it sets a tone up front. And it's not that I'm distrustful of future superintendent. I just think it says, hey, here's what we believe in. Not to say we couldn't bring it back to this committee and say, hey, our beliefs have shifted, or budgetarily we must shift, because that sometimes happens in school districts. And that was part of the reason that you brought up many years ago that it went up a little bit, because at the time there was some pressure on the budget process. So yeah, I don't see a free-for-all because I think it is very clearly laid out, which I think is helpful to expectations by the board and also expectations for the administrators who are delivering these classes. I have very direct conversations with the elementary principals about where they can and can't go. It's helpful. I can say, hey, here's the policy, and here's what I need you to work towards. They might come back to me and beg me to break another section on a certain grade level that's already in policy, but because of the makeup of that grade, they say, Chris, but I really need to drop down to 17 instead of the 23s. And I say, no, we're here to be fiscally responsible, and let's find another way to support that grade without having to add a teacher.
Thank you.
Maybe we do get rid of regulation.
Well, that's what I'm,
Very
that's what I was
good.
looking at.
Yeah.
With that in mind, and the value that is presented by including the numbers in the policy itself, then it's not those numbers that become redundant, it's the regulation that feels redundant to Ms. Baylor's point. Would there be, what would be the downside to consolidating that information into the policy itself? Would it potentially confuse, or would it clarify for the community?
I mean, I think it's also a question of who you think is in charge of determining that number.
Well, it says the superintendent, you could even say, like, the superintendent of schools shall meet with the building principals, that could still be part of the policy. The language of the regulation is more policy than regulation written, so just merging it into the policy may be okay.
But if the superintendent wanted to change the numbers in the regulation, then the superintendent can no longer do that if there's no more
Right.
regulation, has to come to the board each time.
Correct.
And
Well, maybe that's good, but maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's what the value, maybe that gives some of the, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
This is that discussion though, right? Like, what is this part of the board's role? Because if the superintendent or someone is making these changes, it's budgetary. not going ahead,
I
right?
personally like the max because that's umbrella. And I want to leave it to the administration to execute on the max. And as you said, you know, if there's reason to break a class, or if it's really justifiable, or et cetera, that is more, in my opinion, at the administrative level. And we talk often on this committee about wanting to be broad, and yet this should be broad, but I think maxed out.
Mhm.
But the other, I think the regulation piece can be more general, more specific.
And that's why it's set up now. This saying, hey, here's our max in the policy, and here are ranges in the regulation.
Right, and just to clarify, if the superintendent did want to change the maximum, which would really be the thing that impacted budget, that would have to be discussed by the board
Mhm.
because that's written into their policy.
Yes.
Right.
So the only, right, it is just, if the superintendent wanted to, based on more recent research, wanted to change the optimum range, for example, that would not have to go to the board.
Correct.
Come to the board, right.
Correct.
But typically what we do change is that max class size. That's what
Right.
was changed before anyway, right?
True. Yes, that's true. So that would need to come back to the board.
So again, it
It
begs the question, how valuable is the regulation?
Right, like, is it something that should just be?
Right, I'm hearing from Dr. Shields that the regulation is valuable. I don't know if you want to talk to
I think
Dr.
the
Hines.
information
To me,
in
it's-
the regulation is certainly valuable, right?
Yes, but the question is it valuable as a standalone, is what I'm saying. That's what I meant to clarify, as a standalone, rather than being subsumed within policy.
So
I
don't
think
we
that
not
the-
manage regulation? I thought we don't manage regulation.
But the question being raised is the content of the regulation more appropriate for a policy? As
I
opposed to-
don't think
And I
so.
hear Dr. Shields saying he's comfortable with it remaining in regulation.
True.
It's also an issue that is critically important to the community. So personally, I think that the more accessible we can make the information that's important to the community, accessible to the community, the better served we'll be. I think it's difficult for the community, for community members who read the policy to even know that there's information backing it up around optimum class sizes, you know, minimum level, stuff like that. So
So that, I mean, that in of itself means, in all of our policies, I
All
think
of it.
Debbie's been doing it, underneath the reference section of every policy, we should have, there's a hyperlink to the
Yes.
regulation or any exhibit, so that a parent or any person or a board member, anyone can just say, wait a minute, there's other reference things here that I probably should click on, and by the way, if they're hyperlinked, I find that people love to click on hyperlinks, I don't know why, they're attracted to them. So, they're blue, they're a different color, they look interactive,
There's no reason why.
if they work right, so that also would be helpful.
And that information, it's also very reassuring, because I think when my experience of talking to members of the community about this, when it's happened that, for instance, when the elementary class feels too big to some parents, when you look at the optimum ranges and you see that there are only, 2 to 3 kids off of the max, that's reassuring when parents may be thinking, oh, there are 25 kids in this class, there should only be 18, the other class only has 18.
Right.
It's not a 6 to 10 kid difference, it's 2 kid difference between the optimal experience and the maximum experience. So there's information in here that's incredibly valuable. I
Don't
guess
we
the question
have
is, should it be
access?
accessible?
Don't we have access
Yes,
on the
yes.
website?
We do, but it's not referenced, so what would happen is you would see the policy that says like class size. And unless you in the table of contents look below it to see class size regulation, you wouldn't know that there's another page that you should be looking at.
Well, it does say that the superintendent has to promulgate guidelines and regulations, but I can, it's very easy to at least do a cross-reference to, what is this? 4420R. and trying to do a hyperlink. I don't know if the hyperlink will work in our Word docs thingy, but we can put it there.
You can put hyperlinks in PDFs, and which way are we looking now for changing it? So this is another reason to change it to
Yeah, I
PDF.
can, look, I can.
So that the hyperlinks will
I think
work
we should
better.
probably call it for now. Do we think we need to throw this back, or do we think?
I think this committee is done discussing it, and if the board wants to discuss it, yes, it sentence, if the board wants to discuss it, the first reading is
Okay.
up to the board,
Let's do it.
okay? Any other comments? Okay, so then, what are the next meetings, because I lost my agenda. The fifth? Oh my goodness, okay,
Very
so, yes, so February fifth, and is it also at 10 Monday at 9, so different day, different time, Monday at 9, February 5th. But we'll be here, okay.
Thank you very much.
There's like a meeting that's there.
But it doesn't need that, it's like, why is this happening? This is unclear.
It's just like, well, let's do it and then do this. I know. I thought I was
Yes.
And there was what's going on outside.
Raw.
You're wrong.
Right.
No, we know better than computers.
Slay.
No, we no longer slay, that's out. My kids will play. Slay is out. What? It's out, you probably taking yourself home. It's so old, girl.
Way over there?
The other day, I asked my son who was contemplating.
We did so much.
Somebody
for helping get us back to town hall. I didn't do it, go wrong.
I'm not allowed to use such words. I get cringe when they call it that.
Oh, when they say slay.
Or
There was another one that came up, I said,